There's not a person alive that hasn't had conflict in their life. An argument with a parent, an argument with someone they cared about, an argument at school, argument with a friend, argument with a stranger, right? Conflict seems to permeate our life, and many people try to just avoid conflict. But today, we're going to try to figure out how can we solve conflict? Can we actually make conflict something positive? Stay tuned. Let's check it out. Years ago, I was brought into a church that was full of conflict. One of the battles that they were having was over the type of music, right? At that time, the church was trying to introduce this contemporary music into the church service. Before then, they'd only had like an organ, very classic-oriented hymns. So there were the young people that really wanted more contemporary music, and then there were these older people who really wanted for things to stay the status quo. And they were really at each other's throats. So I had watched this conflict resolution seminar that Pepperdine University Law School put on, and I gained a lot of insight. So I tried to use that insight in helping them deal with it. So what I learned was the importance of the T-chart. So when it comes to solving conflict, right, you have to understand that there's two sides or more. And if you don't understand the sides, right, you're not going to do very much in solving anything. So in solving a conflict, what you have to do is first you want to draw a T. Just a T. That's a pretty crooked T. On this T, right, you want to put my view and then your view. And then right here, a big circle. This is the presenting issue. So here's what happened. They were arguing about, should they have contemporary music? Should they have classical music? So the issue was music. That was the presenting issue. So that's what I knew we were going to try to deal with. So I had everybody write down why their type of music was so important to them. Like those that said contemporary music was important, why was it important? For those that said the hymns and traditions were important, why was that important to them? And then I got them in groups, right? So the traditional group was over here, the contemporary group was over there, and I had them try to understand their group, right? So they could come up with some issues. And then after they figured out why their view was so important to them, then they were tasked with appointing one person who was going to explain their view to the other side. So that's what they did. Everybody kind of formulated why that was important to them. Then they nominated a key spokesperson, and that spokesperson's job was to relay why they believed this to the other side. And then the other side was supposed to listen until they could repeat back why it was important. And then they would switch sides, right? Then this side would have a delegate, and that person would then explain their point of view until this side understood it. So before they could even address the conflict, they first had to understand why their belief on what the solution was so important to them. So what was interesting is the side that was very traditional, what they stressed was life and culture had been going so fast, right, and changing so rapidly that they couldn't keep up. So when they came to church, they discovered this was like the only place that was calm. It reminded them of yesterday. It centered them. It balanced them. And one of the older ladies told me, this is the only place that doesn't change, so I feel safe. So they were trying to express to the other side, right, the contemporary music side, that the hymns, the structure, the traditions provided for them stability in a world that was rapidly changing, and they didn't know how to deal with it. Now, the contemporary side, right, when they started to share why that contemporary version was so important to them, they talked about their children. The children were leaving the church because they couldn't stand the music, and so all the young people were leaving, and they were afraid their children were going to go to hell, and they were just scared, right? And so you saw this deep emotion. So after both sides were able to share, right, that the depth of that emotion, then as they had to figure out a solution, they started to see the other side with some compassion. What they didn't want to do is just automatically jump to, hey, let's just compromise. We'll sing 2 songs traditionally, 2 songs contemporary. Because what sometimes, well, I guess for me, every time compromise is 2 sides losing. Sometimes you just can't compromise. But what you hope is that by the dialogue of understanding what's really driving the point of view, that you're able to come together and come up with options. And that process of collaboration, right, leads to a much better choice and a much better decision. Because conflict is not bad, right? Conflict is simply an opportunity to grow closer in that relationship. Because once you solve a conflict, that dynamic is deeper, right? You know you can get through it. So when the next conflict comes, it doesn't push you away. But if you avoid conflict, then conflict pushes you apart, right? And then conflict is seen as bad. And if you avoid conflict, that means that the relationship isn't very deep. So when you're going to solve a conflict, right, draw the T-chart. Try to figure out what's the issue. What is it that we're arguing about? Is it the business? Is it that person? Is it our parenting? Whatever it is. Try to figure out the issue. Put that at the top of the T. That's the issue. And then one side's my view, one side's your view. And then your job is to kind of express why your view is so important to you. Now, if you're listening to the other person's view, you're not trying to tell them they're right or wrong. You're just trying to understand what their view is. So can you understand what they're saying? Do you understand it? You don't have to agree with it, but do you understand it? So if you do, then you repeat it back and you say, okay, is that kind of the gist? And they say yes. And then you trade sides. Okay, well, here's my view, and this is why this is so important to me, this issue, right? And then you express why it's so important. After you express both sides and you look at the issue, sometimes an answer sort of emerges and you're like, hey, I think we can do this. But if not, that's okay. Initially, you just want to be able to express what you feel about the issue without someone being defensive. And then you might have to take a break. It might be a day, it might be an hour, it might be a week. And then you come back and you say, okay, after I thought about it, I think here are the options that I could feel comfortable with moving forward. What are your options? Well, here's some of the options that I feel comfortable with moving forward. So then you write the options out and you see if perchance any of them are similar enough that you might be able to pull those out and they would lead to a collaborative direction in the future. A lot of times just being heard, a lot of times just being able to express why changes the dynamic of a conflict. So when you're in a conflict, remember, if you're in an emotional state, you can't solve that conflict, right? Because at that moment, you're going to make it worse. Every time there's a conflict, you have an option. In one hand, you have a bucket of water, and in the other hand, you have a bucket of gas. You're going to pour gas on the issue, or you're going to pour water on the issue. If you pour gas on the issue, it's going to go. If you pour water on the issue, you're going to de-escalate it, right? So when you come to an issue, don't get emotional about it. Don't get defensive. Try to listen and just try to understand what is the issue. If you can keep your emotions out of it, the odds of solving it increase. So let's say you do everything. You work through the T-chart, you understand different people's points of view, and you're still stuck. Well, that might be time then to bring in a third party, right? Maybe you go to a counselor, maybe you go to your pastor, maybe you go to a friend who's really wise, whatever it is. Try to bring somebody in that understands conflict so that they can kind of separate the person from the issue and kind of lead you on a journey. Sometimes that's needed and sometimes that helps. Now, at the very worst, right? If you're about, hey, I want this car, and it's just a deadhead, but you have to decide. At that point, the level of trust you have in each other has to rise, and somebody has to take the lead. And you have to say, look, on this, Even though we may not agree, I'm going to let you choose, and it's going to be okay. Conflict is not bad. It's simply an opportunity, right, to work together to discover the way through. So no matter what you're dealing with, remember, there's always hope in solving the conflict. So the T-chart really works. So check it out. If you think this video helps you, right, like it. If you think it might help someone else, share it, right? And if you're not a part of the channel, subscribe, because together it is our belief that we can truly change the world. And if you have any questions about conflict or things that worked for you or things that didn't work for you, put them in the comments, right? We'll get to them. We want to have a dialogue. We're part of the same family. So thanks for checking out the video. Have a great day. Doc out.